Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that a routine discussion about farming subsidies, the kind of mundane government work that usually barely makes the back page of a newspaper, has triggered a constitutional crisis that threatens the very separation of powers in our government? And can we truly claim to be a functioning republic when elected officials, members of the president's own party, are receiving credible death threats simply for asking a question about a budget? We find ourselves at a moment in history that scholars, historians, and political observers are struggling to classify. We are not discussing a disagreement over tax policy, a debate regarding foreign affairs, or the usual partisan bickering that has defined Washington, D.C. for decades. We are witnessing something far more precarious, a fundamental rupture within the governing party of the United States, precipitated by an explosion of rage so severe that it has led senior Republican senators to publicly call for the resignation of Donald Trump. To understand the gravity of this moment, especially for those of us who have watched decades of American political history unfold, we must look past the noise of social media and understand the structural damage being done to our institutions. This is not about a mean tweet or a bad news cycle. This is about whether the legislative branch of our government can continue to perform its constitutional duty of oversight without facing intimidation, threats of violence, and the destabilization of the government itself. Let us begin by examining exactly how a routine procedure turned into a crisis. To fully grasp why this specific event has caused such a tremor on Capitol Hill, we must first look at the setting. It was December 3rd, a Tuesday. The House Budget Committee had convened for what is arguably one of the most routine, procedural, and frankly unexciting functions of Congress, a hearing on federal spending priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. For generations, these hearings have been the bedrock of how our government operates. The executive branch proposes a budget, and the legislative branch, holding the power of the purse as granted by the Constitution, reviews it. They ask questions about the math. They ask about the impact on their constituents. This is the machinery of governance at its most basic level. Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma was present at this hearing. For those who follow congressional politics, Tom Cole is a known quantity. He is not a firebrand provocateur. He is not a member of the opposition party looking for a soundbite. He is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, a longtime conservative and a man who has supported the Trump agenda faithfully for years. He represents a district with significant agricultural interests. During the hearing, Representative Cole did his job. He looked at the proposed budget cuts regarding agricultural subsidies and asked a straightforward, data-driven question. How would these specific cuts impact the rural farming communities he was elected to represent? There was no malice in the question. There was no political theater. It was a legislator trying to understand how a policy would affect the livelihoods of farmers in Oklahoma. In any other administration, under any other president, Republican or Democrat, this would have been viewed as standard operating procedure. A policy expert would have answered the question, numbers would have been exchanged, and the hearing would have moved on. But that is not what happened. Donald Trump, watching the proceedings, did not see a loyal committee chairman doing his due diligence. He did not see a constitutional check on executive power. He saw betrayal. He interpreted a question about farm subsidies as a personal attack on his character and his authority, and what followed was not a policy rebuttal, but a meltdown of such proportions that it has shaken the Republican caucus to its core. This brings us to the meltdown itself, which represented an unprecedented escalation in political warfare. Within 30 minutes of Representative Cole asking his question, the response began. It did not come in the form of a press release from the Office of Management and Budget. It came as a barrage of attacks on Truth Social. If this had been a single angry post, perhaps Washington would have shrugged it off as Trump being Trump. We have all become accustomed to a certain level of volatility in modern political discourse, but this was different. This was a sustained, accelerating bombardment that lasted for hours. By the end of the day, there were 17 separate posts. Each one was more aggressive, more detached from the reality of the budget hearing, and more dangerous than the last. The rhetoric deployed against Representative Cole, a man who has been a steadfast ally, was shocking. Trump labeled him a weak rhino, Republican in name only. He accused him of never supporting the MAGA agenda, a claim that is factually incorrect given Cole's voting record. But as the hours wore on, the accusations shifted from political insults to character assassination. Trump suggested, without a shred of evidence, that Chairman Cole might be taking bribes from special interests. He called him a traitor. We must pause and reflect on the weight of that word, traitor. For those of us who lived through the Cold War, who understand the seriousness of national security and the sanctity of our oath of office, traitor is not a word to be thrown around lightly. It implies a betrayal of one's country. It implies a crime punishable by the most severe penalties. To use this word against a sitting member of Congress, simply for asking a question about a budget line item, is a degradation of language and a dangerous escalation of conflict. But the attacks did not stop at name-calling. The rhetoric began to drift into violent imagery. Trump posted that these lawmakers need to be dealt with. He stated that patriots know what to do. We have seen this language before. It is the language of vague incitement, statements that are just ambiguous enough to offer plausible deniability, yet specific enough to be understood as a directive by the most radical elements of his support base. It is the language that says, I am not telling you to be violent, but I am telling you that this person is an enemy of the country who must be stopped. However, what happened next marked a terrifying transition from mere rhetoric to real-world danger. If the situation had remained confined to the digital sphere of social media, it would have been a political problem, but it crossed the line into a physical security crisis when Donald Trump engaged in what is commonly known as doxing. In a move that stunned even seasoned political operatives, the former and current president posted the direct office phone numbers of the lawmakers he was attacking. He encouraged his millions of followers to call them and let them know what real Americans think. The cause and effect were immediate. Within hours, the offices of Representative Cole and other committee members who had dared to speak up were inundated. But these were not calls from constituents expressing concern about the budget. According to reports from congressional staff and Capitol Police, the lines were flooded with death threats. Staff members, young aides, receptionists, policy analysts were on the receiving end of calls telling them that their boss should be hanged for treason. Callers threatened that the representatives should be shot. They were told to watch their backs. This is the grim reality of the current situation. We are not talking about political pressure. We are talking about terrorism. When a leader directs a mob to target specific officials, and those officials immediately begin fearing for their lives, we have left the realm of democratic politics and entered the realm of mob rule. Capitol Police were forced to immediately increase security details for multiple Republican members. Think about that for a moment. Taxpayer dollars are being spent to protect Republican members of Congress from the supporters of a Republican president solely because those members performed their constitutional duty of oversight. Faced with these threats, we witnessed a historic fracture as the GOP leadership finally revolted. The severity of this event, the threats, the doxing, the instability, forced a reaction that many thought they would never see. For years, the strategy of Republican leadership has been to weather the storm. When Trump erupts, they usually stay silent, wait for the news cycle to move on, and hope that the base remains energized. But this time, the silence was broken. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was the first to step forward. A senator known for her independent streak, she issued a statement on December 4th. She did not mince words. She called the behavior unacceptable, and crucially, stated that it was time for serious conversations about whether Trump should continue in office. That alone would have been a headline-making event. But she was not alone. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, a former presidential nominee and a man who has long carried the torch of traditional conservatism, went further. In a statement that will likely be recorded in history books, Romney declared that the president's posts were not just offensive, but dangerous and potentially criminal. Romney argued that the behavior represented a direct threat to democratic governance. He stated that Republicans could no longer ignore the reality of what was happening, that the leader of their party was unstable and utilizing intimidation tactics incompatible with a free society. Romney explicitly called for Trump to resign for the good of the country. This is a watershed moment. We are seeing sitting senators from the president's own party declare him unfit for office, not because of a policy disagreement, but because his conduct threatens the safety of the legislative branch. This brings us to the core of the matter. We are facing a profound legal and constitutional crisis. Why did Senator Romney use the word criminal? Was this hyperbole? Legal experts suggest it was not. In the aftermath of the explosion on Truth Social, legal analysts, including former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and former FBI General Counsel Andrew Weissman, began to scrutinize the statutes regarding threats against federal officials. There is a specific federal law, 18 U.S. Code Section 115, which prohibits threatening federal officials to influence their official actions. The law recognizes that for a government to function, its officials must be free from coercion and the threat of violence. While the First Amendment protects a vast amount of political speech, including criticism that is vitriolic or offensive, it does not protect true threats or speech that incites imminent lawless action. Experts argue that when a figure with the massive influence of Donald Trump identifies specific targets, labels them traitors, provides their contact information, and tells his followers that they need to be dealt with, he is walking a razor's edge of legality. Andrew Weissman pointed to the precedent of January 6th. We have historical data now. We know that there is a direct causal link between Donald Trump's commands and the physical actions of his supporters. When he said, fight like hell, they fought. When he said, march to the Capitol, they marched. Therefore, when he says, deal with them, it is reasonably foreseeable that his supporters will attempt to do exactly that. Even Jonathan Turley, a conservative legal scholar who has often defended Trump during past controversies, appeared on Fox News to express alarm. He described the posts as reckless and stated that a president cannot use the bully pulpit to intimidate a co-equal branch of government. This brings us to the constitutional crisis at the heart of this matter. The American system is built on checks and balances. The Congress oversees the president. The courts interpret the laws. If the president can successfully use the threat of mob violence to silence the Congress, if a committee chairman is too afraid to ask a budget question because he fears for his family's safety, then the system of checks and balances has collapsed. We are no longer a republic of laws. We become an autocracy ruled by fear. I want to pause here and ask for your perspective on this legal distinction. Do you believe the president's social media posts cross the line into criminal behavior, as some senators suggest? Or do you view this as protected political speech, however aggressive it may be? I am genuinely curious to read your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. To understand the severity of this moment, we have to look back at the established pattern of retaliation, the loyalty trap. To understand why this is happening now, we must recognize that this is not an isolated incident. It is the culmination of a long-standing pattern. The transcript and the historical record show us that for Donald Trump, loyalty is not a two-way street. It is a demand for total submission. Consider the case of Mitch McConnell. For 4 years, McConnell was the architect of the Trump agenda in the Senate. He confirmed hundreds of judges. He passed tax cuts. He defended Trump through impeachment. He was the most effective ally a Republican president could ask for. Yet, the moment McConnell acknowledged the reality of the 2020 election results, the moment he prioritized the Constitution over Trump's personal desires, he was cast out. He was labeled an old crow, a hack, and a traitor. Decades of service meant nothing. Consider Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. Rounds is a conservative's conservative. He is as red state as they come. Yet, in 2022, when he simply stated in an interview that the 2020 election was fair, he was immediately attacked. Trump called him a jerk and stupid, claiming Rounds would be nothing without him. One truthful statement erased a career of loyalty. Consider Kevin McCarthy. After the horror of January 6th, McCarthy flew to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. He debased himself politically to repair the relationship. He gave Trump everything he wanted. And yet, when McCarthy faced a rebellion in the House, Trump sat back and watched him fall. And of course, we remember Liz Cheney, a woman with impeccable conservative credentials who voted with Trump 90% of the time. But she drew a line at the violent overthrow of the government. For that, she was not just criticized, she was hunted politically until she was removed from office. The lesson that Tom Cole and his colleagues are learning today is a bitter one. There is no amount of loyalty that is enough. You can vote for the agenda 99 times, but if you ask a question on the 100th time, you are the enemy. This creates an environment where lawmakers are terrified to do their jobs because they know that one slip-up, one moment of honesty can end their careers and endanger their families. All of this has forced the Republican Party into a corner, creating a party that is now at war with itself. This leaves the Republican Party in an impossible position. They are trapped in a civil war between two irreconcilable factions. On one side is the MAGA base. This faction is powerful, vocal, and demands absolute adherence to Trump. To them, any criticism of the leader is evidence of corruption. They view the threats against lawmakers not as crimes, but as justifiable anger against the deep state. On the other side are the traditional conservatives and the institutionalists, the people who believe in the Constitution, in orderly governance, and in the idea that a budget hearing is just a budget hearing. These two groups can no longer coexist comfortably. Reports from the New York Times indicate that Republican senators have been holding emergency meetings, private, off-the-record gatherings, where they discuss what they call the Trump problem. In these hushed conversations, they admit what they cannot say on camera, that the president's behavior is spiraling, that he is unstable, and that he is a liability to the party and the nation. But they are paralyzed by fear. They know that if they speak out, they face a primary challenge. They face the end of their political careers. They face the phone calls in the middle of the night threatening their children. So they face a stark choice. Do they defend their colleagues and the Constitution, thereby sacrificing their own power? Or do they stay silent, enabling the behavior to get worse and watching as the democratic norms of the country disintegrate? It is a choice between political survival and moral courage. And as we watch from the outside, it is unclear which path the majority will choose. Beyond the internal fracture, we must confront the silent consequence of this crisis, the potential paralysis of the American government. If we pull back the lens and look at the daily machinery of governance, a terrifying picture emerges. It is one thing to discuss the political implications of a presidency in turmoil. It is another to witness the actual gears of the legislative branch grinding to a halt because of physical fear. According to reporting from Politico on December 5th, the fallout from these threats has created a chilling effect that is sweeping through the committee rooms of Capitol Hill. Several Republican committee members have privately confessed to their leadership that they are reconsidering their willingness to hold hearings at all. They are reconsidering their willingness to ask the tough questions that are necessary for fiscal responsibility. Why? Because the risk is no longer theoretical. These are men and women with families. They have seen what happens when the President of the United States points his finger and designates a target. They have seen the security details, the bomb threats, and the vitriol. And they are asking themselves a very human question. Is asking about a budget cut worth the safety of my spouse? Is a hearing on agricultural subsidies worth having my children threatened? When legislators begin to self-censor, when they decide, out of fear, to simply rubber stamp executive proposals rather than scrutinize them, we have ceased to be a functioning democracy. This is not how the Founding Fathers designed the system. They envisioned a Congress that would be jealous of its own power, a Congress that would stand nose to nose with the executive branch. They did not envision a Congress cowed into submission by the threat of mob violence incited by the president himself. This is rule by intimidation, and it is the hallmark of authoritarian regimes, not the American Republic. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, the Democratic Party is watching this Republican civil war with a mixture of deep concern and strategic calculation. While they are genuinely alarmed by the breakdown of democratic norms and the safety of their colleagues, they also recognize the massive political opportunity that has been handed to them. As the transcript of recent events highlights, Democrats are realizing that they do not need to spend millions of dollars on attack ads, making the case that Donald Trump is unfit for office. The Republicans are making that case for them. When Senator Mitt Romney calls the president's behavior criminal, and when Senator Lisa Murkowski calls it unacceptable, the opposition party simply has to step back and let the public watch. The fracture within the GOP is not just a disagreement, it is a public confession that the party cannot govern itself, let alone the country. This creates a dangerous vacuum, with the majority party paralyzed by infighting and fear, and the minority party waiting for the collapse, the actual work of the American people, the budget, national security, infrastructure, is held hostage. The Trump problem, as the senators whisper about in private, is no longer just a Republican problem. It has become an American tragedy where the instability of one man is effectively holding the entire legislative branch of the greatest superpower on earth at gunpoint. We must also consider the signal this sends to the rest of the world, the global stage and national security. While we have focused heavily on the corridors of Capitol Hill, we must not make the mistake of thinking this crisis stops at the water's edge. We live in an interconnected world where perception is power, and right now, the perception of the United States is one of dangerous instability. Consider for a moment how this spectacle is being viewed in capitals like Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran. For years, authoritarian regimes have pushed a specific narrative to their citizens and to the developing world. They argue that democracy is messy, inefficient, and ultimately doomed to fail. They claim that the American system of checks and balances is a weakness, not a strength. When the President of the United States launches a scorched earth campaign against members of his own party simply for reviewing a budget, when the legislative machinery of the world's leading superpower grinds to a halt because elected officials are terrified of their own leader, we are handing our adversaries a propaganda victory that they could never achieve on their own. We are proving their point for them. Furthermore, this internal chaos poses a direct threat to our national security. The Budget Committee, the very body that was the target of Trump's ire, is responsible for laying the groundwork for funding our military, our intelligence agencies, and our diplomatic missions. If this committee is paralyzed by fear, if its members are afraid to meet or to ask questions about appropriations, how do we ensure that our armed forces have the resources they need? We are already seeing the ripple effects. Intelligence reports suggest that allies in NATO and partners in the Indo-Pacific are watching this fracturing of the American government with profound alarm. They are asking a question that was unthinkable just a decade ago. Can America be relied upon? If the U.S. government cannot even conduct a routine hearing without descending into threats of treason and violence, how can it be trusted to lead a complex geopolitical alliance? Stability is the currency of international relations. When that stability evaporates, it creates a vacuum. If the United States is consumed by a civil war within its governing party, it loses the bandwidth to address external threats. A distracted America is a vulnerable America. There is also the matter of the nuclear codes and the ultimate authority of the commander-in-chief. The senators calling for resignation are not just worried about a budget. They are worried about judgment. Senator Romney's warning about dangerous instability cuts to the heart of the president's role as the final decision-maker in a crisis. If a question about farm subsidies triggers a meltdown of this magnitude, what happens during a genuine international emergency? What happens when the pressure is not from a friendly congressman, but from a hostile foreign power? The temperament required to manage the nuclear arsenal is one of restraint, calculation, and cool-headedness. The behavior we witnessed this week, the impulsive lashing out, the inability to distinguish between friend and foe, the escalation of rhetoric, suggests a temperament that is antithetical to the responsibilities of the office. This is why the silence of so many national security hawks in the Republican Party is so deafening. They know, perhaps better than anyone, the risks involved, yet they remain trapped in the political calculus we discussed earlier. Ultimately, national security is not just about aircraft carriers and fighter jets. It is about the cohesion of the government. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and a government at war with itself cannot lead the free world. The demands for resignation are thus not just a matter of domestic politics. They are a matter of preserving the credibility and the capability of the United States on the global stage. If you are finding this breakdown of the situation on Capitol Hill informative and want to stay updated on these critical developments, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you these deep dives into American politics. Finally, we must ask ourselves, what are the ultimate stakes for our republic as we move forward? Friends, as we reflect on this chaotic week, we must understand that the outcome of this struggle will define the future of American democracy. When Donald Trump doubled down, attacking Senators Romney and Murkowski after they called for his resignation, calling them losers and traitors, he proved that there is no pivot coming. There is no moment where he will become presidential. The strategy is escalation. The strategy is dominance. The question that faces us as citizens, regardless of our party affiliation, is simple. Can a democracy function if its elected representatives are afraid to speak? If we accept a reality where the president can intimidate Congress into silence, we have lost the America that the founders envisioned. We have lost the system where ambition creates a check on ambition. We have replaced the rule of law with the rule of the strongman. The demand for resignation from these lawmakers is not a political stunt. It is a desperate cry from within the system, warning us that the guardrails are failing. It is a signal that the instability has reached a point where the government itself is struggling to operate. We must pay attention. We must support those who stand up for the institutions of our democracy, regardless of whether we agree with their politics. Because in the end, if the institution fails, the politics won't matter. Thank you for your time and your attention to this critical matter.